I told my wife that if she wanted me to forgive her for cheating, she would have to write me a full confession. This is what she wrote.
It all began over a decade ago when a friend someone I trusted and considered part of my circle started messaging me. At the time, our conversations were innocent, and I never imagined they would lead to anything more. Yet, as life would have it, boundaries blurred without me fully realizing it. I even made a promise to my husband that I wouldn't continue communicating with him, but life is rarely so simple. I recall running into him at soccer games and social events, such as his wedding, where we would catch up about everyday life and mutual friends. At that point, our exchanges were strictly platonic. I was pregnant with our daughter, and he knew it. He would ask about my well-being, and our talks felt natural, like a casual check-in between friends. About a year ago, however, things took an unexpected turn. Our conversations, which had been light and friendly, began to shift on WhatsApp. The tone grew flirtatious, nothing overtly sexual at first, but enough to catch my attention and fill a void I hadn't even realized was growing inside me. I did not delete those messages immediately, even though I was aware they were treading dangerous waters. In the following months, we began talking more frequently. There were times when we would chat on the phone to share our thoughts and feelings about life's ups and downs. The support he offered was something I desperately craved. At home, I felt overwhelmed juggling the challenges of impending motherhood, daily responsibilities, and a lingering sense of isolation that I experienced with my husband. Whenever I felt neglected or misunderstood, he was there, listening and asking how I was truly doing. His attention and understanding became a soothing balm for my anxiety. One afternoon, during a particularly rough week when my husband's behavior was unkind and I was wrestling with feelings of inadequacy, I found myself exaggerating my troubles during our conversations. I needed validation, and he was always ready with comforting words. I even admitted that I wasn't happy with how things were going in our marriage, though I still loved my husband and genuinely wanted to repair our relationship. In those moments, his empathy filled the gap left by my husband's inability to meet my emotional needs. The situation escalated when, on a friend's suggestion, I agreed to attend a football game with him as friends. I was surprised when my husband, against my expectations, consented to me going with him, something he would normally have refused. The day of the game started innocently enough. We sat together, shared casual conversation, and nothing overtly inappropriate happened. However, as the evening progressed, after he drove me home, the tension in the air became palpable. He pulled over unexpectedly and asked if he could touch me. Instantly, I said no, feeling a mixture of apprehension and guilt. Yet, as we continued talking about my ongoing issues, he touched me again, this time on my breasts. Torn between guilt and the desperate need for comfort, I reluctantly allowed it. I wasn't satisfied by the fleeting physical connection that I allowed. Instead, I felt a crushing weight of guilt and shame. Deep down, I knew that this wasn't what I truly wanted. I felt as if I were sinking deeper into a predicament I could hardly control. Despite my internal conflict, the physical touch offered a temporary reprieve from the emotional isolation I experienced at home. That day marked the beginning of a cycle I now deeply regret. On subsequent occasions, each encounter followed a similar pattern, a blend of supportive conversation and boundary-crossing physicality. Every time I engaged in these acts, a part of me screamed that I was compromising not only my marriage, but also my self-worth. Yet, the allure of his empathy, his ability to listen and understand, kept me tethered to a dangerous liaison. I tried to stop it. I attempted to have a conversation with him about drawing clear lines, but every time I found myself conceding to the comfort he provided. Then there was the day we met for coffee, a seemingly ordinary meeting that spiraled into something far more complicated. In the intimate privacy of his car, while we continued discussing life and my inner turmoil, he asked to touch me once more. I hesitated but eventually consented, only to retract my permission moments later. In that brief window of vulnerability, he showed that he could listen when I said no. But as our conversation continued, he shocked me by asking for oral sex. I vehemently said no and resumed our mundane talk as if nothing had happened. Despite my protest, I felt an indescribable pull of fear that rejecting him completely might sever the only lifeline I had to feeling understood. Throughout this period, I was constantly conflicted. I craved his support and the validation he seemed to offer so freely, yet every encounter deepened my guilt. The situation was compounded by the fact that he admitted his own conflicted feelings for me. He acknowledged that he cared deeply but insisted he didn't want to jeopardize my marriage. His words made little sense. Here I was, tearing apart my own life, while he claimed to want to preserve what we had. I was caught in a paradox. The more he validated me, the further I drifted from the integrity I once held dear. I began to see the pattern for what it was. an escape, a desperate attempt to soothe anxiety and feelings of abandonment that had long been ignored. I recognized that beneath every physical encounter lay unaddressed issues of self-worth and unmet emotional needs. Yet, even as I became more aware of the problem, I felt powerless to stop the cycle. I was afraid to tell my husband anything, fearful of the inevitable anger, hurt, or rejection that might follow. I clung to the secret, convinced that if I could maintain the facade, maybe I could preserve the remnants of my marriage. Eventually, the inevitable happened. I reached a breaking point where the guilt and shame became too overwhelming to bear. In a moment of clarity, I attempted to end it all. I called him to confess that I had told my husband about our relationship. His response was to ask if there was any way we could salvage what we had built, as if that were even possible. I told him then and there that I needed to cut off all communication I needed to reclaim control over my life and my choices. Looking back, I see a series of decisions made in a haze of vulnerability and self-doubt. I now understand that beneath the surface lay deep-seated issues, anxiety, a profound sense of unworthiness, and a desperate need for validation that I sought in all the wrong places. The physical interactions never filled the void they were meant to soothe. Instead, they only deepened my internal conflict. Every illicit touch, every whispered word of comfort reminded me that I was straying further from the person I aspired to be, loving wife and a confident individual. Today, I carry the weight of that time with a weight of guilt and regret for decisions made in moments of weakness. Yet, I also see it as a painful lesson that has forced me to confront my own vulnerabilities. I realize now that true validation and support must come from within, or from those who are truly present and capable of offering honest care. My journey toward healing involves acknowledging these mistakes and taking responsibility for the choices that led me astray. I am determined to grow from this experience, to learn how to be more in control of my emotions and actions. I aspire to rebuild trust with my husband and, more importantly, with myself. The road ahead is daunting, but I now know that I must face my issues head-on rather than escape into temporary solace. While the memories of that time will always be a part of me, they no longer define who I am or who I wish to become. I hope that by sharing this story, I can find the strength to move forward and perhaps help others avoid the same pitfalls.